Lord of the Mysteries audiobook by Kevin 871 director. What happened? The sudden change made the inexperienced Hazel momentarily lost as to how to react. She stood there in dazed silence for a few seconds before pushing open the door and rushing in. When she arrived beside the charred rat, the existence that claimed to be a demigod rolled in a fit, speaking with a calm tone. "You forgot to close the door." Ah, Hazel first wore a blank look before realizing that she had failed to close the door like she usually did because of her eagerness to access the situation. Doing so prevented the maids from peeping in. With the rat appearing fine, Hazel pursed her lips and turned around, walking back to the door. During this process, she didn't forget to glance at the full-body mirror. She saw that everything in it looked normal without any problems. It clearly reflected everything in the room. There weren't any additional people or objects. As the door clicked shut, Hazel asked, "Teacher, what happened just now?" The charred rat looked at her sidewards as it cast its gaze beyond the window. In the world of mysticism, anything that involves supernatural power is filled with danger. You can't be too careless. I had tried to use the mirror to do a divination, but I ended up garnering the attention of an unknown existence. After an intense struggle, I finally resolved the problem and prevented the danger from spreading across the street. The rat spoke fluently without any stammering or hesitation, as though being struck by lightning was something trivial. "Is that so? Why didn't you warn me of such matters in the past?" Hazel couldn't help but frown, as she could smell the mixed smell of charred fur and the demigod's condition. He paused for a second and probingly asked, "Why didn't you directly kill her?" Arrodes's mirror outlined silver words. "If one can't be certain in killing a demigod target, it's best not to force them into a corner. Once they aren't repressed, they will completely let themselves go. That would result in them mutating into an incomplete and irrational mythical creature. Most of the time, to have a problematic condition and to having trouble fully expressing their powers is because they are resisting their inclination of losing control. I'm not here in my actual form, so all I can do is deal a small punishment." When the final line appeared, the full-body mirror's aqueous light shimmered. Klein suddenly had the feeling that a creature was looking at him with widened, watery eyes. He didn't respond towards that and instead nodded. "That's it for today. I'll summon you again if there's anything else." "All right, Master Tilda." The mirror immediately produced a hand-waving emoticon. After cleaning up the room, Klein finished his afternoon nap and left the master bedroom. Before long, the white-gloved Walter came to the third floor and entered the half-opened room with the balcony. He said to his employer, "Sir, the church has sent a letter. They've invited you to be a director in the board of directors for the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation. You can choose to directly take up a post there to receive a sizable salary, or you can choose to take on a symbolic role. You will only participate in the discussion and vote when handling major matters. The church sure is efficient. It has already set up the framework." Klein thought, and felt that since he had already donated more than £10,000, there was no need for him to claim a salary. It was better to not expect anything in return as he deliberated. "I'll take on a symbolic role. However, I wish to participate in some of the actual operations of the foundation in the future. I wish to contribute further to spread aid to help more people." "I will inform the church of your thoughts," Walter seriously replied. "If you have nothing else, it's best you head over on Wednesday morning to witness the official establishment of the foundation." Dwayne raised his porcelain cup and drank a mouthful of black tea. "Okay." On the Golden Dream, Danet sat in front of the deck, worriedly looking at the azure-blue sea that was churning with waves. After being urged once by Jam and Sparrow, he felt that he couldn't delay any further. Otherwise, he might become a bounty at any time. "I don't want to become a pile of cash while I'm sleeping, so what if I'm suspected?" Danitz gritted his teeth and mustered his courage. He passed through the cabin door and headed straight for the captain's cabin. Being unable to find Anderson Hood in a short span of time, he could only ask Vice Admiral Iceberg Edwina Edwards. After reaching his destination, Danitz took 3 deep breaths and raised his right hand, prepared to knock on the door. At this moment, Vice Admiral Iceberg's voice sounded from inside. "Please come in." Danitz's right hand paused in midair as he forced a smile and entered. He saw that his captain was sitting behind a desk, holding a dark red fountain pen. He had no idea what she was writing. "Captain, I have something I'd like to consult you about." Danitz came over and bent his back slightly as he said with a smile. Edwina put down her fountain pen and pulled at her sleeves that were laced with flowers. She glanced at Danitz and said, "You wish to ask about West Balham?" "Ah," Danitz's expression froze. "The captain already knows. It must be those beeson RDS and Dog's tea like barrel and iron skin. They told captain about it. I know that no secret can be kept on this ship, and it's even more so for captain." After cursing inwardly, Danitz forced a smile again. "Yes, as you know, I'm very interested in history and geography." Edwina's limpid eyes moved slightly as she looked out the window. "This is international politics." Without waiting for the stiff Danitz to find another excuse, she continued on. "In West Balham, there are cities managed by the Loanese, valleys belonging to Intis, native generals who are supported by loan, and tribes who follow Inti's orders. There are also powerful independent states who rely on the requirement that both nations are balanced. They are secretly connected to the different factions of the numinous episcopate and are in a rivalry with those who claim to be the descendants of death. In addition, the Rose School of Thought and Fasak Empire have a deep influence on West Balham. On the surface, none of the factions belong to them, but in fact, many of the generals and tribal chiefs have submitted to them. Among them." Danitz listened in surprise before he lowered his hand suddenly with a dry chuckle. "Captain, I need to take notes, or else there's no way to memorize this." Edwina, who had been interrupted, wasn't mad. She pointed at the fountain pen and paper on the table. "That's a good habit. I believe J.M. Sparrow doesn't wish to receive erroneous information." "Ah," Danitz was stunned once again. "West Balham Shore is chaotic. It's difficult to even tell which backing faction that a medium-sized warlord belongs to, or who he's supported by. The Rose School of Thought has a very strong influence there. That means a sharp rise in risk for me." Klein had quickly scanned through Danitz's letter after receiving it from Miss Messenger Rionette Tinecare. It made him believe that he shouldn't head to West Balham alone unless Mr. Azek accompanied him. 872 Results of Mediumship. Watching Miss Messenger leave, Klein glanced at the letter in his hand and considered the problem of West Balham again. He believed that he needed to make preparations in case that Mr. Azek wouldn't reply to him in the next month. That also meant that, when July came, he might very well have to head to West Balham with a few military personnel, without the Death Consul's protection. If that happened, the shadow of the Rose School of Thought would ultimately hang over him. 2 choices. If I confirm that it's extremely dangerous, I'll directly abandon my identity as Dwayne Dance. On the contrary, I should seriously consider a customer list. I will not have myself involved in any faction that's suspected to have ties with the Rose School of Thought. I might as well set a target first to make any unexpected developments be controllable." The information provided by Danitz likely comes from Vice Admiral Iceberg. The 2 native generals mentioned seem rather special. The other factions, regardless of the reason, will have a note of their ties with Loan, Intis, Fasak, and Fainapotter, or the various inclinations of internal factions that form a counterbalance. Only, for them, there is no mention of foreign countries other than the point about receiving support from the numinous episcopate. Klein read the content from beginning to end as he vaguely figured something out. He had his initial suspicions that the two native generals were related to the Church of the God of Knowledge and Wisdom. The reason why Edwina didn't make any note was to deliberately point out their uniqueness, telling Jam and Sparrow that they were targets to cooperate with. This way, she didn't need to worry that there would be a leak from Danitz, as there was no information to leak other than a hint. Masonche, Catamia. The former receives the support from the royal faction of the numinous episcopate. The latter secretly claims to be a descendant of death. Heh, even if it's real, who knows how many generations separated he is. If he were to meet Mr. Azek, how should he refer to him? Klein chuckled and shook his wrist, burning up the letter. Following that, he began enjoying an exquisite afternoon tea in the half-opened room with the balcony until Walter entered and whispered, "Sir, the police are here again. It's regarding Quaran's suicide." The matter's clues superficially pointed to Dwayne Dance, so even though Baron Sindras had handled the matters, the police would visit him from time to time. Otherwise, the reporters would claim that it was a dereliction of duty by the police. As for the assault on Member of Parliament Mact, as Dwayne Dance was only a relatively important eyewitness, they didn't disturb him further after taking his statement. Invite them to the activity room on the second floor with the garden. Klein placed the butter sponge cake he had taken a few bites from onto the plate and drank a mouthful of tea. As the master, he didn't need to worry that his food would go to waste. This was because the leftovers would be given to the servants. If he were to eat them clean all the time, or request them to prepare the perfect proportions, then his reputation as a stingy master would spread across the servants on the street before reaching the ears of the ladies and gentlemen. Walter replied with an unperturbed expression, "They wish for you to head to the police station. Today is the day the Quaran family will be identifying the suspect in a police lineup. They say that they are very sorry, but this is a necessary process that cannot be skipped." Klein slowly got up as he said, "Understandable. Richardson, get me my coat, hat, and cane." Since he was already no longer involved in the matter, he was rather willing to figure out what Quaran and his family had encountered from a bystander's perspective, and also how the matter had been directed towards Baron Sindras. Inside a spacious room in the police station at Northborough, Klein stood behind a glass wall and saw Quaran's family. It was an elderly man and woman, a woman in her late 30s, a teenager who was around the age of 15, and a girl who wasn't older than 10. Their gaze swept the suspects behind the glass wall before landing on Dwayne Dance at the same moment. "It's him! It's him!" the teenager yelled as his eyes turned red. He clenched his hands into a fist in an attempt to rush towards the glass wall. "It's him, officer, it's him." The lady in her late 30s suddenly wept as she looked at Dwayne Dance with eyes filled with hatred and animosity. The little girl who was holding her hand wailed, "Daddy, return Daddy to me." The two elders were wiping their tears. One of them was trying hard to keep calm while the other was nearly fainting from her sobbing. The sorrowful mood instantly spread out. However, Klein had never even met them before today. Implanted memories. He frowned slightly. As he sighed, he began wondering what the Quaran family had encountered. Meanwhile, in the mortuary beneath the station, Dolly Simon held a pencil and began sketching as her body shook slightly. As she was here to help at the police station, with the possibility of her encountering reporters when entering or exiting, she didn't wear her usual spirit medium robes. She changed into a female black and white police uniform set. She had a blouse and skirt on with matching leather boots. At this moment her palm was moving uncontrollably, and soon there was a desk, oriel window, ink bottle, revolver, and other items appearing on the piece of paper. On the oriel window there was a figure reflected there. This figure's hair was neatly combed back, a mix of silver and raven black. The wrinkled figure had a broad forehead and high cheekbones. He was none other than Baron Syndra's. Pa! The pencil in Dolly's hand dropped onto the piece of paper. She then looked up and said to Leonard, who offered to help, and the two police inspectors who were in charge of the liaison, in the second that Cuaron committed suicide, he struggled deeply in his heart. That is to say that his suicide is a result of cueing and guidance. This isn't a simple psychological problem. It must have involved beyonder powers at a rather high level. And this contradictory struggle resulted in his emotions breaking down, suffering an explosion from his spirituality. Before his death, he would restore the truth to a certain degree. This is the scene that's fixed in his eyes. The high-ranking inspector beside her furrowed his brows. "Ma'am Simone, are you implying that the last person Cuaron saw is the real murderer? Baron Syndra's is actually the real murderer?" Leonard Mitchell immediately scoffed. "What you see might not be equivalent to the truth. You might not understand it if I call it an illusion, but if I'm a murderer, I can find a person that looks like Baron Syndra's so as to make him appear inside the room before Cuaron committed suicide." The two inspectors were very pleased with the explanation, as they heaved a sigh of relief. "We've already arranged for Cuaron's family to pay a visit. I'll have to trouble the two of you to obtain more clues that point towards the truth with non-intrusive means." "All right." Dolly rubbed the corner of her eyes. "I'll use the washroom first." She hadn't put on her strange eyeshadow or blush. Apart from her skin appearing rather pale, she didn't have that uncanny look to her. Furthermore, she seemed younger, looking more like a woman in her 20s than 30s. Her eyes were bright, and she had beautiful facial features. Believing that they were in for plenty of work, Leonard Mitchell also left the mortuary and walked towards the washroom above them. Just as they finished climbing the staircase and turned a bend, they suddenly saw a gentleman with white sideburns appear on the other end of the corridor. He was walking out of the police station with his valet. This gentleman was mature and elegant, with eyes that were like a lake under the moon. He was none other than Dwayne Dance. Dolly Simone's mind went adrift for a moment as she turned her head in thought. She looked at Leonard Mitchell and discovered this black-haired, green-eyed poet was looking at Dwayne Dance. "Why did you suddenly file for permission to help me? That member of the numinous episcopate will soon be found. You have no lack of tasks to do." Dolly didn't give Leonard a chance to find an excuse. After pausing for a second, she directly asked, "You believe that gentleman from before is problematic?" Leonard retracted his gaze and fell silent for 2 seconds. "Dwayne Dance has met His Grace before." He deliberately didn't provide any sort of confirmation or denial, as though the question she had should be posed to St. Anthony. In between the lines, he was saying that His Grace didn't mention if there was any problem with Dwayne Dance. Whether it was a lack of any detection or simply because he didn't say, that was up in the air. Dolly nodded gently as she turned her gaze towards the washroom. On Wednesday morning, Audrey Hall, who had received an invitation, rode on a carriage to arrive at the St. Samuel Cathedral on Phelps Street. The lone charity bursary foundation which was about to be established was situated on 22 Phelps Street. The building belonged to the Church of Evernight, so there was no need to pay any rent. Before getting off the carriage, Audrey held the invitation and looked out at the scenery. She was filled with anticipation for the future. She was to become a director and would work on raising funds and with external liaisons. 873 Undetectable Communication. After entering 22 Phelps Street, Audrey instantly saw Dwayne Dance walk out from the side corridor. This good-looking and gentlemanly gentleman was wearing a black formal suit and holding a gold inlaid cane. He was communicating with the foundation staff beside him. As though sensing Audrey's gaze, Dwayne Dance naturally turned his head and looked at the door. Then, his eyes lit up in amazement like he had seen a treasure. Following that, He smiled and gently nodded as a greeting. Audrey returned with a smile and nod that wasn't a breach of etiquette in any way. She then followed the lone charity bursary foundation staff that came to escort her and walked up to the second floor. During this process, although she didn't look in any other direction, but be it the talent of a woman or her instincts as a spectator, they told her that Dwayne Dance's gaze kept following her figure in secret until the wall beside the staircase blocked his view. Impeccable acting. He perfectly played out the reaction of what a gentleman who has zero resistance against beauties, but remains sufficiently reserved and cultured would do when meeting me for the second time. It's as though we have only met once at the charity party the last time. It's exactly as I imagined. He was even able to light up his eyes. This is a technique that's part of his Seer Pathway, or is it an ability that he possesses to begin with? I have to say that J.M. Sparrow, I think it's better to use Mr. J.M. Sparrow as a professional, no, an excellent actor. Furthermore, he doesn't act in an exaggerated manner like those play actors. Audrey complimented in thought before seeing a few reporters waiting to interview her about the establishment of the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation on the second floor. She wasn't a noble lady who enjoyed having her photo plastered on the papers. As she exchanged a few words with her valet that had accompanied her to inform the reporters that pictures were forbidden by Earl Hall's authority, she went into the VIP lounge with her lady's maid, Annie. Earl Hall was friends with the owners of a few publishing houses and had made the corresponding investments to acquire quite a bit of their shares. If Audrey so wished, she could exchange some of the estate she received in order to create a sizable publishing house. In the VIP lounge, Audrey, who didn't find it appropriate to bring her dog, greeted the children of the rich and aristocracy, as well as the church's clergymen. She habitually found a seat where she could see everyone, and she waited until the opening ceremony began and for the first board of directors meeting to begin. She surveyed the area and said to the female staff that was in charge of escorting her, "Lovesa, this is my first time joining in the actual operations of a charity organization. I wish to know what we should do." The lady named Lovesa was still in her 20s. She also had blonde hair with somewhat rough skin and tanned freckles. However, her smile was brilliant, making her rather affectionate. Upon hearing Audrey's question, Lovesa introduced without holding anything back. "The current plan is to not be too eager in widening the scale. We will start mainly with Backlund and reach deep into the public primary schools, weekday schools and night schools, promoting the bursary to all the students and let those in need to apply to us. After the application, we will organize a committee to do the exact audit. This will not only require us to make some verifications with the government, but we would also walk across the grounds to understand the candidate's actual situation. Once the examination is over, we will disperse the bursary and help the poor who yearn for knowledge to change their fates." Just as Lovesa said that, a male voice filled with magnetism interjected, "I have two suggestions. The first suggestion is that staff are to be gathered today to head to the different weekday schools, night schools, and public primary schools to promote the bursary. June is the examination period, and it's a critical period for them to enter institutes of higher learning. If we aren't efficient enough, there will be many students from poor families that will give up taking the examination because of the lack of funds. Even if they later learn of the existence of the Bursary Foundation, they won't be able to withstand the loss of wasting a year. As such, they will lose the chance at changing their fate. What we are doing might seem simple, but it completely affects each and every child's life. Therefore, we need to begin quickly and not waste any time." The person who was speaking was none other than Dwayne Dance, who had just entered the lounge. He expressed his thoughts with a warm but serious expression. "All right, June is the examination period. be it entering grammar school or the preparations to enter university, as well as the various technical schools to gain experience in their profession. This is a critical period. Once they give up the entry examinations this time, they will have to wait till next June. I actually forgot this. Ma'am Lovesa and the foundation staff seems to have missed this problem. Mr. Dwayne Dance actually noticed such a detail and had considered those children who are so close to giving up their dreams. He's actually a person with a gentle heart. Audrey suddenly felt that she had a new take on Dwayne Dance on J.M. and Sparrow. This was what a spectator had just obtained. A cold assassin, adventurer on the surface but has a warm heart deep down. Unfortunately, I've only been able to obtain descriptions regarding J.M. and Sparrow's crazy side. I'm unable to find any concrete proof. Audrey blinked as she carefully listened to Dwayne Dance's suggestions. Second suggestion. In regards to the bursaries that are to be dispersed, it's best if it's put in the corresponding bank account. When school fees need to be paid, they can bring their documents to us to apply for a withdrawal. For relatively cheaper board and lodging, things don't have to be that troublesome. They can obtain a fixed sum of money every month or week. This is to prevent the applicant's parents and siblings from spending the money. To a poor family, this is an irresistible temptation. Similarly, an account corresponds to one person. No matter who is withdrawing it, the person has to be present. This can effectively prevent people from suffering from the trial of greed. Having said that, Klein pressed his palm to his chest and said to Audrey and Lovesa, "Sorry, pardon me for barging into your conversation." Audrey smiled and said, "Mr. Dance, your suggestions are excellent. You have opened my eyes to matters that I never considered before. The only problem is that what you say to us is meaningless. I'm only listening to Ma'am Lovesa's introduction." Lovesa smiled and said, "Yes, you should mention all of these at the first board of directors meeting. Don't you see me deliberately coming over to convince Miss Audrey first? With Justice's part in this, I can ensure that there will be no objections from the board of directors. Otherwise, it might easily be tabled or altered by someone using some excuse such as lacking manpower." Klein made an enlightened and regretful expression as he rubbed his palms slightly. "Look at me, being all anxious about these matters and forgetting my place. Ha ha ha. Sometimes I just wish that things will be made into reality once I'm given the chance. Mr. Dwayne Dance's acting is a little exaggerated. He should know that he can't fool me. Oh, he's doing it deliberately to communicate with me ahead of time without leaving behind any traces. He wants me to support him." Audrey instantly read his thoughts as her smile turned clearer. Although she hadn't communicated with the world ahead of time, she believed that she would support this tarot club member of hers. However, being able to exchange some ideas ahead of time left her rather happy. This was because she felt that he was treating her as an equal. After forgiving Dwayne Dance's recklessness and watching the man walk to the table with beverages and pastries in the lounge, Audrey looked away and said to Lovesa, "What I'm responsible for is to raise funds at different occasions and to communicate with the government and parliament." "That should be a simple matter for you," Lovesa answered frankly. This was also why the church's charity department didn't object to Audrey Hall's participation. In fact, they were very supportive of it. Audrey nodded in thought and said, "If I have the time to spare, can I join you in visiting the different schools for the promotions, as well as the examination of the candidates?" Lovesa was originally unwilling to agree, worried that the environment wasn't suitable for Miss Audrey. But when she saw her clear green eyes and took in her request that she couldn't resist, her heart softened. She felt that such kindness shouldn't be stopped. It wasn't to be isolated from the reality of the lower class. If Miss Audrey sees true misery and ugliness and is still willing to help the pitiful people, she will definitely be able to be of greater use. It will prevent the higher-ups from always formulating unrealistic measures. Lovesa quickly found a convincing reason as she sighed and smiled. No problem. However, you won't be able to wear such a dress or wear any jewelry. What do I do with lie? Turn it into a bracelet and hide it under my sleeves. Audrey thought as she replied with a smile, all right. With Miss Audrey Hall's support, the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation's first board of directors meeting ended perfectly after its establishment. Klein returned to 160 Birkeland Street in a good mood. Following his usual habits, he entered his master bedroom at around 2 to have an afternoon nap. In his hazy dream, Klein suddenly jolted awake and sensed something. Someone was attempting to infiltrate his dream. Who is it now? I'm even getting disturbed in my afternoon naps. As Klein mumbled, he made the dream transform into the half-open room with the balcony. Then he saw the black-haired, green-eyed Leonard with his unkempt clothes somersault through the window. Does this fellow not know how to use the main door? Why is he suddenly here? I should remember to get his contact method. Klein sat in his reclining chair, feeling peeved and amused. He looked at the poet with a leisurely expression and said, "This is an impolite way of visiting me." When Leonard heard that, he bowed in a manner that lacked standards. "Mr. Dance, I have something I would like to consult you on." "Consult? That's a nice attitude. Also, it doesn't seem to be anything major." Klein secretly tusked as he said, "What's the matter?" Leonard grabbed a seat and deliberated before asking, "You were embroiled in Cuaron's suicide. Who do you think the real murderer is?" If I wanted to know, I would have thrown out Frank's mushrooms. However, I can't say that I've no idea at all. That just lowers the impression he has on me. Klein was very accustomed to such situations, so he expertly laughed and instead of answering, asked, "How were your investigations?" 874, I didn't say anything. Leonard Mitchell clasped his hands together and leaned in slightly. "We have restored the scene Cuaron saw before his death. This didn't directly show the murderer, but the glass on the oriel window happened to reflect Baron Syndras's figure." After a pause, Leonard added, "This is too simple and unconvincing. A powerful banker and noble at Baron Syndras's level wouldn't need to personally take action or be present to watch if he wants someone dead, unless he has some special fetishes. And as you know, there are many ways to replicate such scenes, be it via an illusion or disguise." When he mentioned disguise, he looked up slightly and glanced at Dwayne Dance. It was as though he was implying that the latter's present appearance was unlikely his true appearance, just like J.M. and Sparrow and Sherlock Moriarty. What a simple and direct way of framing someone. It's really suspect if the murderer behind the scenes really wants to frame Baron Syndra's home. I should process everything from the beginning. First, assuming that I, in other words, Dwayne Dance, act like an ordinary person. Anyway, I won't mention the conclusion and only raise questions to guide his train of thought. If the final answer isn't right, that must be because my dear poet misinterpreted it and was unable to figure out what I was getting at. Klein smiled as he raised his porcelain cup and took a sip of black tea. Let's not consider this problem first. If the person who wasn't embroiled in this matter wasn't me, how would the case have developed? Leonard raised his clasped hands slightly as he tapped his index finger. As a suspect, Dwayne Dance would be remanded at the police station, but his butler, servants, neighbors, and friends will be able to testify that he has never made contact with Cuaron's family. Hence, the testimonies from both sides will contradict strongly. The police will be unable to handle it and request the Nighthawks to intervene. Using mediumship means, we will see the scene Cuaron had before committing suicide, thus obtaining Baron Syndras's figure. As he spoke, Leonard suddenly fell silent. After a few minutes, he continued speaking under Dwayne Dance's smiling gaze. Regardless of the unconvincing, odd, and simplistic nature of the clue involving Baron Syndra's, we will follow protocol and make contact with him and begin the relevant investigations. and this will lead to certain problems related to him being noticed by us. Baron Sindras is involved in matters involving the Beyonder domain, so he can't stand up to further scrutiny from the Nighthawks. The more Leonard spoke, the more certain he became. It was as though he had figured out the mastermind's line of thought. He, or they, might not care if their trap is seen through. As long as they get the Nighthawks to do a routine investigation on him, their goal will be achieved. This is because Baron Sindras hides a rather serious and easily discoverable problem. Yes, that's the same conclusion I have. This is actually closer to sounding the alarms by providing a tip-off, but it's more mild. It looks like a trap that will make the Nighthawks definitely investigate things while hiding their existence, of course. I won't directly acknowledge your guess. Wouldn't it be awkward if I was actually wrong? Klein crossed his right leg over his left and laughed. Baron Sindras, who has been alerted, definitely won't show any problems now. Leonard slowly nodded and said, as though explaining to himself, "This Baron's experiences are rather legendary. He has been pushed to the brink of bankruptcy a few times, but he managed to turn the tide and ended up reaching a new height. Perhaps, in one of these instances, he had sold his soul to the devil, an evil god, or some other secret existence out of desperation. This story is quite reasonably crafted." Klein didn't comment on the accuracy of Leonard's guess before asking, "On the other hand, how would the Nighthawks treat the real murderer that led to Qron's suicide?" Leonard temporarily put aside all his previous thoughts, and he began following the train of thought based on an ordinary development. The design trap is too crude. The cueing, guidance, and memory implants were done in an insufficiently concealed and mild manner. It's easy for people to discover problems. Therefore, it's unlikely to be done by mid- or high-sequence Beyonders from the spectator pathway. It looks more like it was done by a Beyonder from another pathway who relied on a mystical item to pose as a spectator. Before he finished his sentence, Leonard fell into silence again, his thoughts a mystery. Klein maintained his faint smile as he calmly looked at the poet. It was as though he had everything under control, but he wasn't going to say a thing. Everything depended on what Leonard figured out. "This is very similar to what Old Man said from before. Is it really done by some mid- or high-sequence Beyonder from the spectator pathway?" His seemingly crude and flawed setup was actually a precise consideration of everyone's reaction. Everyone's response at every step of the way was taken into consideration, with the only mistake stemming from Dwayne Dance's experience and wisdom. Leonard felt that he had already figured out the truth as he got up and coughed gently. "Thank you for your advice." Klein immediately chortled and said, "I didn't say anything." Without waiting for Leonard's response, he said, "Your former colleague got me to ask you how he should inform you if he were to discover traces of Nc Zangwill." Leonard, who had planned on getting up to bid farewell, sat back down. Colored with a complicated expression, he said, after more than 10 seconds of silence, "Pass the information in the form of a letter to 7 Pinster Street." This means that he won't be leaving Backland anytime soon. Or is it that no matter how far he goes to carry out missions, he will have the means to monitor 7 Pinster Street and read the letter remotely? It might be the latter assumption. A Marauder Pathways angel definitely has many magical secret techniques. Leonard can definitely use one of them. I can't ask, or else it will lower Dwayne Dance's level and destroy my setting. Klein wore an unperturbed expression as he said with a smile, "I'll inform him." Leonard didn't immediately leave as he opened his mouth, paused, and asked, "If I wish to contact him, how should I do it?" His green eyes were deep as they spoke volumes when he asked. Klein was already prepared, so he said with a smile, "The spirit that wanders about the unfounded, the friendly creature that can be subordinated, the messenger that belongs to Jam and Sparrow." You can ask Palez about the exact ritual if you aren't too sure. Leonard knew that J.M. and Sparrow was Sherlock Moriarty, who was also Klein Moretti. He nodded indiscernibly and stood up. "Thank you for informing me. Please pardon me for my intrusion." With that said, he retreated to the door, opened it, and left the dream. Hey, you left just like that. As a nightmare or as a former nightmare, shouldn't you consider how there might be problems with your memory? You remembered it just from hearing it once. You aren't putting enough weight on this matter. Klein couldn't help but lampoon when he saw Leonard's figure disappear. He shook his head in exasperation, ended his afternoon nap, and began busying himself over the matter regarding West Balham. On the Golden Dream, Danitz, who had finally finished his mission, drank some iced light beer because of the recent hot weather. If it wasn't because the creation of ice needed beyonder powers, and that there wasn't much to go around, he felt that he could finish half a bucket of ice in one go. That's what I call life. Danitz guzzled the remaining liquid in his cup. At this moment, he saw grayish-white fog appear before him as J.M. and Sparrow's voice began echoing in his ears. "Please inform Danitz that he is to immediately head to West Balham. Figure out the situation of the areas under the control of the two native generals, Masonche and Katamia. He should take special note of any signs of Rose School of Thought activity. Head to West Balham." With a cup in hand, Danitz stammered J.M. and Sparrow's request repeatedly. He had once headed there with the Golden Dream crew to seek out treasure. He had also obtained rather detailed intel from his captain. Therefore, he knew how chaotic and dangerous West Balham was. "Furthermore, I have to go alone." Danitz uttered a sound as he found his future bleak. Primitive forests with all kinds of hidden and terrifying creatures, native tribes who believed in death and had all sorts of peculiarities, paths filled with bandits and rebel armies, villages with wraiths and shadows haunting them, and cities that had gunfights or even beyonder battles surfaced in his mind. "No, I have to say no to J.M. and Sparrow. Say no, he should at least send me a helper. Ordinary people can survive in West Balham and become rich, having their own manners. This means that it's not as horrifying as I imagine it to be. I'm just frightening myself. Besides, J.M. and Sparrow just requested me to figure out the situation, not to contact anyone." Danitz quickly forced a smile and requested Mr. Fool to inform J.M. and Sparrow that he would immediately take action. Then, following J.M. and Sparrow's instructions, he set up a bestowment ritual to pray to Mr. Fool. When the ritual came to an end, he saw an illusory door open. A dark gold and sunbird-shaped brooch flew out, landing on the altar. Sun brooch. In the southern continent, in a kingdom once ruled by death, the Seer Pathway was one of the most effective beyonder pathways. Directly giving me such a precious item. It's not bad working for J.M. and Sparrow, however. He said something about it being borrowed. Danitz picked up the brooch and felt his surroundings turn hot and humid. After handing out a mission to Danitz, Klein was just about to open the door to instruct Richardson to get him a cup of iced water when he felt his spiritual perception trigger. Immediately, he activated his spirit vision and saw Rionette Tinker walk out of the void. She held the 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in her hand, with one of them having a letter in its mouth. "Who's it from?" "Leonard." Klein reached out his right hand in suspicion. 875 Mummy 7 Pinster Street. Leonard Mitchell came to his desk and unfolded a piece of paper. He then picked up a fountain pen and lowered his wrist in preparation to write. However, just as he dipped a dark blue spot onto the paper, his fountain pen paused. He attempted to move his wrist in order to write a few times, but all his attempts ended up stopping due to hesitation. He raised his wrist, lowered the fountain pen, and repeated this action again and again. Finally, he froze his wrist in midair. "Pa!" Leonard threw down his fountain pen, crumpled the piece of paper, and accurately threw it into the trash can. At 160 Birkeland Street, Klein received a thin letter from one of Miss Messenger Rionette Tinker's heads. He felt the weight in his hands, and only when his spiritual intuition didn't send him any warnings did he tear it open and retrieve the letter inside. There was only one page, and on it were 2 lines of text written in neat, beautiful handwriting. "I have something that will require your help. Let's discuss it in detail, face to face." Sharon, so it's Miss Sharon Klein, had his questions answered as he took out a gold coin and did a simple divination in front of Rionette Tinecare. Then he took out another piece of paper and wrote one word: "Tonight." After he folded the letter, he asked Miss Messenger as he handed it to her, "Can you still locate her?" If it wasn't possible, he planned on giving her Sharon's mailing address. "Hillston Borough, 126 Guard Street, Ma'am Maryam." "Yes." One of Rionette Tinecare's blonde, red-eyed heads gave an answer. The head then opened its mouth and bit down on the letter. After Miss Messenger vanished from the room, Klein immediately held a ritual, planning to bring Creeping Hunger back to the real world from above the gray fog. He then planned on traveling to the various archipelagos in search of a lucky pirate. Creeping Hunger hadn't been sealed yet, so it still required feeding once a day. All Klein could do was barely use it, feeding it whenever he needed to use it. He would then throw it back above the gray fog when the next feeding time was at hand. He wasn't planning on making up for the difference. "If Creeping Hunger dares to make a fuss about it, I'll feed it mushrooms." After ending the ritual and clearing up the scene, Klein wore the thin human-skinned glove, turning his body translucent until he vanished from his spot. He had his dinner, and after waiting for Creeping Hunger to finish its howling above the gray fog, Klein went to retrieve it by using the excuse of having an upset stomach to enter the bathroom. He then used this opportunity to teleport to the area outside the Bravehearts bar in the Backland Bridge area. During this process, he had already changed his appearance, turning into the black-haired, mustached, and bespectacled detective, Sherlock Moriarty. Bending his back and rolling up his pant legs, Klein gave a self-deprecating laugh. He lowered his hat and nudged open the heavy wooden door to step into the bar. After asking the bartender, he held a cup of Southville beer and went to Billiard Room 3, where he knocked on the locked door. Knock, knock, knock. Amidst the rhythmic knock, the door creaked open a tiny gap. The red-eyed Ian peeped his head out before breaking out into a smile. "Sir, please come on in." As the weather was turning warm, he no longer wore his old coat. Instead, he wore a simple linen shirt. Klein nodded with a smile and quickly entered the billiard room, where he took in the surroundings almost instantly. Marek, with his hair a little messy, was wearing a white shirt, black vest, and black pants. He was holding onto a cue stick and had his back bent to play billiards. Perhaps having a deep impression of causing chaos for Sherlock Moriarty, he didn't summon his zombies to play cards with him. "Long time no see," Klein greeted first. Meanwhile, Sharon, with her small black bonnet and black, regal gown, appeared beside the billiard table, sitting on a high stool. "Good evening, ma'am." Klein moved his gaze over and bowed with a smile. Sharon seemed to float up as she stood up before raising the hem of her skirt to do a slight bow as a polite response. As for Marek, he lowered his cue stick and said in a gruff voice, "From the looks of it, you're still in Backland." His face was as pale as ever, but the evil look in his brown eyes had lessened significantly. It seemed to be evidence of the effective temperance he had in recent times. It was apparent that his acquisition of the scarlet lunar corona prevented him from almost breaking down on every full moon, so much so that he didn't need to frequently switch to new types of sedatives. Klein didn't directly answer Marek. Instead, he walked to the billiard table and put down his beer. Smiling, he said, "I'm very sorry. I was planning to sell a Wraith Beyonder characteristic to you, but unfortunately it was lost." Sharon's blue eyes didn't move, nor did she probe for a reason. All she asked was a simple, "Are you all right?" She knew that the Wraith Beyonder characteristic Sherlock Moriarty mentioned belonged to Admiral of Blood Center, and he was also Sherlock Moriarty's marionette. By losing the Wraith Beyonder characteristic, it also meant the loss or destruction of his marionette. This was a significant loss for such a Beyonder. "I'm still all right. At least I didn't suffer any harm," Klein said with a sighing smile. "No wonder I didn't see Senner this time," Marek muttered in enlightenment. "Marek and Miss Sharon don't seem too bothered about the lack of that Wraith Beyonder characteristic. They have other means or methods to acquire one." Klein sharply grasped this point and switched to asking, "Is there something this time?" Marek immediately glanced at Ian. The staid teenager didn't ask further as he quickly left the billiard room and closed the door. Sharon's doll-like face didn't show any emotion as she allowed Marek to speak. "Tomorrow, there will be a ship from the southern continent arriving in Pritz Harbor. It is intimately tied to the Lone Army. This ship carries with it treasure and relics plundered from the Star Highlands, Paz Valley, and Hagenti Plains. Among them is a mummy. It's the 19th king of the ancient Hagenti Plains, Tutmosis Roman II. The southern continent's original language didn't stem from ancient Phaeacian. It had its own structure. In the ancient Highlander language, king also has the special term Khedive. It was translated by Emperor Roselle as Pharaoh. It's a mystery what he was thinking. Also, mummy was named by him too. In short, the meaning of Pharaoh is the son of God, king of humans. Tutmosis Roman II was once a high-sequence Beyonder. However, after his death, the corresponding characteristic was taken away, leaving only his corpse behind to be made into a mummy. To other Beyonders, this is a material filled with spirituality, an excellent choice for creating a zombie. But to us, it has another meaning, a very important meaning. Our goal this time is to obtain that Tutmosis Roman II mummy. Another meaning: the corpse of a high-sequence Beyonder without any Beyonder characteristic. Apart from using it as a material, there's another meaning to it. Klein's heart stirred as he suddenly thought of Ma'am Hermit's request to purchase a drop of mythical creature blood. Could it be the ritual requirement to go from sequence 5 Wraith to sequence 4 Puppet? Miss Sharon already has the formula and has digested the Wraith potion. From the way she acts, she's practically acting as a Wraith all the time. Who knows, she might have digested it a long time ago. However, when we were in the underground ruin talking to the evil spirit, it was evident that she didn't possess the puppet potion formula. Yes, everyone has their own circles. It's not strange for her to be able to obtain it. Klein swept his gaze at Sharon while in thought, but he failed to discover any obvious changes from before. She was still more like a doll than a living person. However, she didn't show any signs of being even darker and creepier. Sharon silently sat there and watched Sherlock Moriarty and Marek intently, listening into their conversation. If it's just a high-sequence mummy without a Beyonder characteristic, the level of protection can't be too high. Just the two of you shouldn't find it difficult to snatch it away. Klein raised a suspicion. From his point of view, a sequence 5 Beyonder could be considered quite a powerhouse. Unless the ship had a demigod escorting it, it was very difficult for Beyonders at the same level to put up any effective resistance if her target was solely a mummy. After all, there were too many items the Beyonder guards had to look out for. Furthermore, they might be scattered in different cabins due to the different means of storage. This time, it was Sharon's turn to provide the explanation. She used her succinct manner of speech as usual. "We're worried that it's a trap the Rose School of Thought is using to target us. If there's nothing, 1,000 pounds. If there's something, we will be in charge of drawing attention while you take away the mummy. Depending on the level of danger, it will range from 5,000 to 10,000 pounds. "I see." Klein didn't immediately reply as he thought and asked, "Do you know of spirit world plunderers?" A wraith was also a type of Beyonder who could effectively move through the spirit world. Sharon nodded slightly and said, I can use the cash and the relevant information about spirit world plunderers as payment, Klein tersely acknowledged. I'll consider it. I'll write to you before midnight. As an excellent seer, he would head above the gray fog to confirm the level of danger regardless of what it was. However, he could confirm that this was definitely not a trap targeted at him since he had no need for a mummy. "All right," Sharon replied with a deadpan expression. Klein didn't immediately bid them farewell as he walked to the door and informed Ian to enter. He then asked, "Are there any news worth taking note of recently?" Ian thought for a moment and mentioned pieces of information that were relatively important. "Someone is trying to find out about the organization that believes in the Fool." Klein was somewhat surprised as he asked with a smile. A young man with black hair and green eyes. He suspected that it was Leonard Mitchell. Ian shook his head. "No, black hair and black eyes. Some mister from the Aurora Order." Klein considered for a moment before asking, "Can you draw who it is?" Ian was taken aback before he said in a self-deprecating manner, "You might never be able to recognize him if that's the case." At this moment, Sharon said, "I can help you." "All right." Ian first heaved a sigh of relief before following the instructions to prepare a rather simple ritual. Then his body trembled as he drew a sketch while being possessed by a wraith. It was a young man with curly black hair, black eyes, a wide forehead, and a thin face while wearing a monocle. Ammon, blasphemer Ammon, 876 Art of Diverting Trouble Ammon. Klein's pupils constricted, and although he looked normal on the surface, he tensed up significantly with his heart churning with waves of alarm. Although he had kept using Ammon to scare the grandpa in Leonard's body, as well as the Marauder Pathway demigod beside Hazel, he was only using the name. He never expected that this blasphemer, a king of angels, would arrive in Backland so quickly. He was even looking for the organization that believed in the Fool. In fact, although it's surprising, it's understandable. With Backland having an angel and demigod of the Marauder Pathway, it's only a matter of time before Ammon arrives based on the law of Beyonder characteristics convergence. The only problem is that he has been searching for something in the forsaken land of the gods for so many years, so it's unlikely he would suddenly abandon his search. Besides, his mausoleum in the outskirts of Backland has been destroyed by the machinery hive mind, making it difficult for him to come and go as he pleases. Therefore, this isn't his main body but an avatar that exists in the northern continent. An angel of the Marauder Pathway should be good at using worms of time to create avatars. Ammon must be stronger than them. Klein's thoughts raced as fast as lightning as he gradually came to a certain conclusion. At times, he even suspected that the mythical creature of the Marauder Pathway was a bunch of worms of time that combined together via a certain method. As a Marauder Pathway's king of angels before the cataclysm, Ammon definitely knows what the name, the Fool, means and can detect the corresponding aura. He might even wish to steal control over the gray fog. He came here for the Fool this time. This is really going to be a headache. After his initial shock, Klein gradually composed himself. What he was most afraid of now was that he would end up encountering blasphemer Ammon because of the law of Beyonder characteristics convergence. And Ammon was clearly able to detect his uniqueness. When that happens, it might not even cause a stir before the so-called the Fool had to consider if he could be resurrected. After all, this was a king of angels, an existence just second to a true god. Furthermore, the Marauder Pathway was always known for their deceit and concealment. Ammon wasn't necessarily afraid to take action, even in Backland. Perhaps stealing the fate of others was a strength of his. From the looks of it, temporarily leaving Backland to head for West Balam might not be a bad choice anyway. The biggest problem stems from myself. If I had already advanced and become a bizarro sorcerer, I'll be able to hide the gray fog's aura. Even if I encounter Ammon, I won't have to be afraid of exposing anything. Klein drew a silent breath as he once again felt a sense of urgency. He needed to quickly push open the door to Sequence 4, change his existence, and become a demigod. For this, he needed to work harder, be it making another marionette, acting at a deeper level to speed up his digestion, or gathering the corresponding ingredients. Phew, Backland really is a terrifying place. If Ouroboros hasn't left, or if he has already returned, just the ones I know would number 4. No 5 angels, including 2 kings of angels. I haven't included the royal family and military who use Backland as their base. I haven't included the underground evil spirit whose whereabouts are unknown. A former king of angels that fused with the wills of 2 other angels. If the Rose School of Thought's abomination Sua comes in pursuit of Jam and Sparrow, that would really be a bustle. This would be nothing compared to the demigod-level battle outside Bayam City. Klein looked at the sketch drawn by Ian as he vaguely shook his head. Okay, got it. He shook his head. To Ian and Marek, he had said so because he didn't know the monocled man, but in fact, he was expressing his exasperation. I'll have to leave. I'll reply to you before midnight. Klein took off his hat and bowed, slowly walking out of the billiard room. He then teleported back to 160 Birkeland Street from a secluded alley outside the Bravehearts bar. Inside his master bedroom, the first thing he considered wasn't Miss Sharon's and Marek's request, but on how he was to deal with the problems that Ammon brought with him. In such aspects, being rather experienced, he quickly came up with an idea. It was to find something for Ammon to do to draw his attention away. As for what that was, it was definitely something he found irresistible, something that he would definitely be interested in. For example, an angel from the Marauder Pathway, Pallas Zarost. Perhaps this was key to Ammon's ability to become a Sequence 0 true god. It would be something far more important than finding the organization that believed in the fool. Of course, Klein definitely wouldn't directly sell out Leonard's grandpa because he had yet to show any ill intent to date. His thoughts were simple. It was to inform this matter to Pallas Zarost that Ammon was already in Backland. He wanted to see the reaction of the angel who had survived since the 4th epoch. Then, he would follow up based on the situation. If that grandpa is helpless against Ammon, who's likely only an avatar, he can only get Leonard to use the excuse of a mission to leave Backland to hide from Ammon. As for me, I'll have to bring forward my trip to West Balam. I'll just say that it has something important to do with my network. I'll secretly teleport back for the placenta blood when Snake of Fate Will Ossipton is born. Klein arrived at a decision as he took out a piece of paper and wrote, Ammon has arrived. Folding the letter and putting it into an envelope, Klein took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew hard. When Rionette Tinker appeared, he took out a gold coin from his pocket and pressed it on the envelope. This was one of the 10 gold coins that he had gotten Richardson to exchange for him in the afternoon. It was to maintain his image of Dwayne Dance to being equal to someone at the level of Pallas Zarost. Even when Klein informed Leonard Mitchell of the method of contact, he didn't inform him that the payment of a gold coin was needed. This shows that face is something you buy with money, as Klein sighed. He said to Miss Messenger, who was wearing a dark, complicated dress. Send the letter to 7 Pinster Street. Oh, just throw it into the mailbox. There's no need to send it to the addressee. As he wasn't certain of Pallas Zarost's true intentions and character, Klein wished to hide more of his trump cards in front of him. Therefore, before Leonard wrote to Klein Moretti, he had no plans on letting the poet see Miss Messenger. The blonde, red-eyed head in Rionette Tinker's left hand was raised up as it sucked the letter and gold coin into its mouth. However, she didn't immediately disappear. Instead, she floated at her spot, looking at Klein silently with all 8 eyes. What's wrong? Klein was taken aback before coming up with a guess. He asked with an odd expression, "You don't know where 7 Pinster Street is?" Only then did he recall that a messenger's delivery of letters depended on their mysticism-based location. It was based on the person they contracted with and people they had formerly delivered letters to. Therefore, once the latter left a detectable range, the messenger would not be able to find them. Upon hearing Klein's question, 2 of Rionette Tinker's heads nodded in unison, indicating that she didn't know. Klein immediately coughed lightly, pulled out the drawer, and took out a map of Backlund. He then used a fountain pen to circle out North Borough. Following that, he circled Pinster Street. "When you're here, you will see the unit number on the buildings." Klein folded the map and handed it over. The head in Rionette Tinker's right hand immediately opened its mouth and bit down on the map. Then, her figure phased away and entered the spirit world. Upon seeing this, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. He turned and walked out of his master bedroom and headed for the half-open room with the balcony to read the papers and magazines. Late into the night, he took 4 steps counterclockwise before soaking into the bathtub and entering the mysterious space above the gray fog. Helping Sharon and Marek obtain the Tutenses Roman II mummy is dangerous. Klein took off the topaz pendant on his left wrist and let it hang to perform a divination. This time, the spirit pendulum rotated clockwise with a weak amplitude and relatively slow frequency. This means that the danger isn't too great. Furthermore, even if it's a trap targeted at Miss Sharon and Marek, there's no need for the present me to be too afraid. Klein beckoned with his hand as he made a translucent miniature black crystal card fly to him. This was the Fate Siphon charm. Klein had used a worm of time to create a demigod-level high-level charm. Right on the heels of that, he summoned Creeping Hunger and the Sea God Scepter. Wearing the former, he picked up the latter and recorded Lightning Storm and Hurricane. The mutated and upgraded Creeping Hunger could use Mr. X's soul and characteristic to record 2 demigod-level Beyonder powers that didn't exceed sequence 3. With this, Klein no longer needed to borrow Leymano's travels anymore. Furthermore, it was more convenient. After all, flipping a spellbook affected his use of Death Knell and the Fate Siphon charm, unless he grew another 2 hands. After making his preparations, Klein returned to the real world, pulled out a piece of paper and wrote simply, exact time, location, and plan. At 1 a.m., Leonard, who had slept 2 hours, woke up energetically. He prepared to leave 7 Pinster Street and head for the St. Samuel Cathedral's basement. Just as he stepped out the door, he suddenly had his spiritual intuition trigger before he subconsciously cast his gaze to the side. A look of puzzlement flashed in his eyes as he walked over and opened the mailbox. During dinner, he had cleared the newspapers, bills, and letters inside. Typically, there wouldn't be any items in the mailbox until daybreak. After all, the mailman would have clocked off work and returned home. However, at this moment, there was a thin letter waiting silently at the bottom of the mailbox. "Old man, you didn't inform me of a new letter," Leonard said softly as he picked up the letter. The slightly aged voice in his mind replied, "The person didn't enter." Leonard knew that old man's senses were limited to his body, hence he didn't speak further. He tore open the envelope and took out the letter, flicking it flat. The letter was mostly empty with just one short line. "Ammon has arrived." "Ammon has arrived." Leonard's pupils dilated immediately. At the same time, he heard the parasite in him gasp for the first time. Thank you for listening to the story on KevinAudio.com 877, whose trap towards Ammon. Leonard didn't have a strong, direct impression of him. All he knew was that it was the most feared enemy of the parasite in his body. He was the culprit that left this mysterious and powerful old man injured to this day. Therefore, he quickly calmed down and asked with a suppressed voice, "What do we do now?" In his mind, the slightly aged voice sounded after 3 seconds. The one that came probably isn't Ammon's actual body, but one of his avatars. He, indeed, blasphemer Ammon, is an angel, and probably a sequence 1 angel. After all, Old Man is suspected to be a grounded angel. As Leonard absorbed the information to verify his theories, he listened to Pallas Zoroast continue. If Ammon's actual body appears in Backland, it might very well cause a deity's descent. A deity's descent. How many years has it been since something like this happened? Since the 5th epoch, occurrences like these were legends that were recorded in the internal canon. They had never publicly happened before. Could this mean that, even among sequence ones, Ammon is one of the most powerful existences? It's no wonder he is called a blasphemer. In just a few words, Leonard came to realize how terrifying the angel named Ammon was. Standing in front of the mailbox, his thoughts wandered when he suddenly had an idea. He hurriedly suppressed his voice and said, "Since Ammon has such importance placed on him by the deities, shouldn't we try to find a way to inform the church of the news of his appearance in Backland?" From Leonard's point of view, the Church of Evernight and Storm, which was born in an earlier epoch and existed through the entire 4th epoch, had rich experience in resisting angels. They were the best choice at dealing with Ammon. In his mind, Pallas Zoroast chortled. It's useless. It might even be something Ammon wishes to accomplish. To him, it's just a loss of an avatar. It will just waste a bit of his strength but not deal him any actual harm. And he can use the death of his avatar to see the corresponding changes in fate. From that, he will be able to see the source of the stir or the creation of the waves. Although this doesn't allow him to directly lock onto you and me, he will be able to greatly reduce the circle, creating the conditions for his actual body to deal a lethal blow. Besides, do you think there will only be one avatar of Ammon in Backland? Based on his habits and style, he might only have one avatar that he doesn't hide, but in fact, surrounding this beacon are several dozens, or even more than 100 avatars. When we attempt to eliminate the one that's out in the open, it might very well be the case that a few dozens or more than 100 Ammons will appear from every spot. He could be a passerby, a bird on the roof, an ant on the ground, and he could also be an insect in wooden logs, microbes in the air. One who isn't a demigod wouldn't notice it even if his avatar invades their bodies. As he listened to Old Man's detailed description, Leonard felt a chill run through his back. He suddenly had a feeling that the surrounding air was filled with countless Ammons. "You're afraid now," Pallas Zoroast chuckled. "If you understand how Ammon can steal away your fate without showing any anomalies, you will be even more terrified." "What do you mean by stealing away my fate?" Leonard asked, feeling wary and puzzled. Pallas's old voice sighed. "He will follow you back. Then you'll discover that your parents will be making him their son. Your wife will view him as her husband. Your child will treat him as their father. Your friends, everyone you know, will treat him as you. And you will be the unlucky one. You will lose all connection with the real world and slowly die." Would such a theft be permanent? Leonard couldn't help but draw a gasp. Pallas Zoroast sniggered. "Before a thief is caught, will he volunteer to return what he stole, unless he has had enough fun with it?" Leonard instantly fell silent. He felt that an enemy at Ammon's level was no longer someone one could defend themselves against, but was completely unfathomable. After a few seconds, he asked, hardly being able to hide his hoarse voice, "Then what do we do?" He didn't share his own thoughts because they were most likely unpragmatic. Pallas Zoroast fell silent for a moment before saying, "Let's watch and see." Inside the Braveheart's bar, Marek was waiting at billiard room 3 according to the agreement. Since Sherlock Moriarty had agreed to provide help, discussing the operation's details face-to-face was necessary. It wasn't something that could be figured out via an exchange of letters. Guzzling down a mouthful of beer, Marek raised his hand to comb his hair. His pale face was drained of the color of blood. The demented look on his face was a lot less than before. At this moment, his heart stirred. He looked up to the side and saw a figure in a top hat and formal suit outlined quickly. It was none other than Sherlock Moriarty. Teleport. Merrick's heart palpitated as his pupils constricted. He instinctively raised his level of wariness. This wasn't because he didn't trust Sherlock Moriarty, but a natural reaction for a creature when facing a higher existence on the food chain. At the same time, he noticed through the corner of his eye that Sharon's doll-like figure had appeared on the high stool. Klein pressed down his hat and bowed at the two. He said with a smile, "What I'm most concerned about is the amount of intel you have. If there's sufficient intel, the chances of success will be higher and the risks lower. Let me raise a simple example. Do you believe that Tutanses' mummy doesn't have any problems? Can you confirm which coffin it is in? If you can, I can teleport over before the guards react, traveling with it through the spirit world. That way, the problem will be resolved." Just as Merrick tried recalling, he heard Sharon say in a calm tone, "It can be confirmed which coffin it is, but we cannot confirm if there are any problems with it." Klein nodded and pulled a chair over to sit. "Apart from that, what else do you know?" Sharon's blue eyes moved slightly. "It might be a trap by the Rose School of Thought, or it might be a trap by the lone military. You didn't mention the second guess previously." "That's right, before obtaining any confirmation of cooperating together. Even I wouldn't divulge too much," Klein thought as he questioned, targeting the latter point. "A trap meant for the Rose School of Thought," Merrick answered this time. He said in detail, "In the ancient Highlands Kingdom, creating a mummy was the tradition for an esteemed person. It's considered sacred, and the pharaoh's mummy is not something to be blasphemed against. Back then, before the Lone, Intis, and Phaenopoter allied forces attacked this kingdom, the pharaoh's descendants had moved the most important batch of mummies, including the remains of the pharaohs of past dynasties. This time, one of the Highlands rebel armies had their secret base stormed. The Lone Army found the Tutanses Roman II mummy at the lowest level, and plan on delivering it to Baklan to hand it to an unknown military organization for research. To the pharaoh's descendants, this is an insult of the greatest order. They have a sufficient motive to snatch Tutanses' mummy back, and among these descendants, there's a demigod named Mamosi. He's both one of the main leaders of the rebel army and is also an important member of the Rose School of Thought. He's the student of abomination Sua." Klein nodded slightly and answered, "That is to say that Tutanses' mummy might be bait for the Lone Army to fish out Mamosi. Of course, this doesn't exclude the possibility that the Rose School of Thought is deliberately sacrificing a pharaoh's remains to eliminate you." He originally wanted to say that, as a sequence 6 and 5, there was no need for the Rose School of Thought to go to such an extent. But when he recalled that the present main faction of the Rose School of Thought was Indulgence, with them not holding back when it came to their desire for revenge, he believed that he couldn't make a decision using an ordinary person's point of view. Furthermore, Miss Sharon and Merrick were able to escape the Mother Tree of Desire's restrictions and successfully escape from the Rose School of Thought. Apart from luck, they might have someone supporting them in secret. If there is such a person, that person is definitely a target the Rose School of Thought wants to be uprooted. Klein's mind naturally formulated these thoughts, but he didn't say it out loud. "Yes," Merrick said as he rubbed the corners of his eyes. The large amount of words he said had made him feel perturbed both in mind and desire. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "If it's the former, the situation might be more troublesome than I imagined. To deal with a demigod with companions, the Lone Army will have at least 2 Beyonders at the same combat level as Mamosi lying in ambush. Apart from that, they will definitely have some redundancies to prevent any accidents. For example, They will prepare a grade 0 sealed artifact. In short, if this isn't near Backlund or made into a joint operation with the three churches, it might not be possible to so easily set up such a trap. Sharon's chin moved slightly as she nodded in agreement with Sherlock Moriarty's judgment. Klein didn't emphasize the difficulty as he said, "Therefore, we have to obtain more accurate and detailed intel. From that, we can make more targeted preparations. This will allow us to achieve our goals." Without waiting for Sharon and Marek to say a word, he added, "I know of a secret existence for magic mirror divination. He strictly adheres to a principle of reciprocity. If you do not mind your privacy or actions that will bring about intense humiliation, you can obtain answers to many questions from him. Are you willing to try? I'll perform the summoning. In dark divination, whoever did the summoning typically suffered the greatest risk. What happens if I refuse to divulge my private matters or reject doing such actions?" Marek asked with narrowed eyes. Klein sincerely replied, "You'll suffer a lightning strike, causing quite significant damage." Lightning strike. Marek originally believed that with a zombie's toughness, it wasn't too big a problem to suffer any direct damage, but he had never expected it to be lightning, which was relatively strong against the dead. He hesitated for a moment and glanced at Sharon. After receiving an affirmative nod, he exhaled and said, "Okay." Klein didn't speak further. He took out a piece of paper from his pocket as he instructed, "Prepare a mirror." Just as he said that, a palm-sized makeup mirror appeared on the billiard table. A regal-styled makeup mirror. Klein glanced at it and drew a symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. 878 arrows, question with Klein finishing his final stroke, the lights in billiard room 3 dimmed. On the dainty makeup mirror, aqueous patterns rippled out before turning into a dark scene. Immediately, one bloody word after another appeared. "Raise your questions." This scene was filled with a sense of supernatural horror. Even though standing there was a wraith and a zombie, they couldn't help but feel overwhelmed as they momentarily didn't dare say a word. Only Klein continued wearing a smile as though he was accustomed to all of this. He had previously exhorted Arrows to not raise questions that were too difficult or private, and also to not act like a servant. If it wasn't because Sharon and Marek could ask much more targeted questions as a result of understanding the situation better, Klein was more inclined to handling it himself and not exposing the reality of having such a helper. After a few seconds of silence, Marek took 2 steps forward, came to the billiard table, and opened his mouth. At this moment, Sharon's gentle but emotionless voice sounded, "I'll ask the questions." Without waiting for Marek to answer, she floated up into a standing position and looked at the mirror. Is the Tutances Roman II mummy a trap that the lone military set up to target the Rose School of Thought? The mirror's blood-red words melted away and slid down, dragging away the stains, barely leaving 2 words behind which wriggled to form. "That's right. It is indeed a trap the lone military set up for the Rose School of Thought. We can preliminary eliminate the situation that it's a plot the Rose School of Thought has to target Miss Sharon and Marek. After all, the risk involved exceeds the value of a sequence 5 and 6 combined. Even if the Rose School of Thought can't curb their desire for revenge, they wouldn't be this crazy. Unless they were already planning on dealing with the lone military and decided to involve this matter as well. If that's the case, the best place to have such a matter unfold would be in the southern continent or at sea, and not somewhere in the vicinity of Backlund. Who knows what kind of terrifying fellows are hidden here? Amidst his thoughts, Klein saw the surface of the mirror turn dark again as new blood-colored words appeared. "Based on the principle of reciprocity, it's my turn to ask a question. If you answer wrong or lie, you will be punished." Rather obedient. He didn't make the request of doing artistic actions. Looking at the billiard table, Klein nodded indiscernibly. At this moment, The words from before slowly vanished, presenting new words. You, as the bloody word froze for a full 3 seconds, it followed up, are to answer with the relationship between the chained god and the mother tree of desire. For some reason, Klein felt that the remaining parts of the sentence had its blood-colored text darkened significantly. Thankfully, the question wasn't too out of place, and it was something he would like to know. Sharon looked at the mirror and replied in a deadpan manner. Since the fifth epoch after the perishing of death, the Eggers family gradually lost control over the Star Highlands and Paz Valley, allowing those places to have their own Beyonder organization, the Rose School of Thought. In the beginning, there wasn't the mother tree of desire, only the chained god. The Rose School of Thought advocated temperance and established a religious ritual system, including laws. Formal members led ascetic lives to deal with the repercussions of receiving powers. One day, a divine revelation added terms about indulgence. Many people slowly changed and restored ancient but bloody primitive sacrificial traditions. Later, the school of thought's upper echelons began secretly calling the chained god the manifestation of the mother tree of desire. By the sound of it, the chained god was corrupted by the mother tree of desire bit by bit or replaced. If this entity was once a sequence 0, then the mother tree of desire is truly terrifying. It's no wonder it's viewed as an enemy by all the other deities. However, the chained god might not be a sequence 0. There's a small possibility of being a uniqueness that has fully come to life, or a king of angels with 2 sequence 1 characteristics, or even someone weaker. There's currently not enough information to verify the matter. Klein frowned slightly as he began thinking about the matters regarding the mother tree of desire. At this moment, Sharon had switched to asking, what problems does the Tutances Roman II mummy possess? On the mirror's surface, the blood-red text squirmed and changed into a complete sentence. It's filled with hexes, a manifestation of hexes. It has the possibility of automatically becoming a zombie. This mummy is comprised of hexes. As expected of a corpse left behind by a high-sequence Beyonder, how should this be resolved? Klein turned to look at Sharon and Marek and discovered that they were sufficiently calm without any hint of surprise, as though they already knew that. And this also meant that they had the means to resolve the matter. Of course, Sharon didn't have much of an expression regardless of the matter. She was as calm as she always was. After Arrodes answered, it followed the principle of reciprocity and raised its question. You have been trying hard to increase your sequence. Why do you do so? This time, it had used the same bloody text as the opening, but the words that followed after a few seconds didn't appear that bright. Does this mean that Arrodes is hesitating and struggling, resisting its own urges? On the one hand, it finds it difficult to curb its wishes to raise difficult-to-answer questions, but on the other hand, it's taking my instructions into considerations and thus holding back. Klein thought in amusement. Sharon stood there in silence before gently moving her lips. In the beginning, it was to not be bullied by others. Now, it's to have the strength to protect myself and my companions and revenge, as well as spread the principle of temperance. If everyone can temper their desires to not have wars and killing, there will be less misery. Klein was surprised by what he heard. His impression of Sharon was that she was a woman of few words. It wasn't that she couldn't say that many words, but that even if she had much to say, she held back greatly and didn't provide any additional descriptions. For example, in her answer to the first question, she had simply recounted the situation, and although she appeared to say a lot, she hadn't said one word more or anything subjective. The word she added towards the end was a relatively talkative act based on her character. This is something that's been on her mind, a point of view that she has been repressing for a very long time. Klein suddenly imagined the chaotic reality of the wars in the southern continent. They were lands with plenty of slavery. There were batches of people from the lower class who died of hunger and sickness. There were constant wars and live sacrifices. If I were born in the southern continent and could live to this point, I'll definitely wish for world peace and happiness to the people. Speaking of which, Miss Sharon and Merrick do not look like they are of southern continent descent. That's right, before death perished, passage between the northern and southern continent was allowed. Also, Sharon mentioned revenge. That word was said without conviction, as though she doesn't hold out hope for it. Or does she not have that strong of a desire for it? Klein sighed silently as he watched Sharon raise detail after detail and answer question after question. After learning of the situation regarding the Tutmosis Roman II mummy, Sharon asked again, apart from Mamosi, who are the high-sequence beyonders that will appear in this trap? The mirror surface's aqueous wave rippled and formed a bright light, one that enveloped everything. Nothing else could be seen. With Arod's powers, it likely involves an angel or grade 0 sealed artifact. That's why it wasn't able to provide an accurate answer. Klein retracted his gaze and said to Sharon and Marek with a smile, "From the looks of it, it's as I guessed. The lone military has prepared plenty of redundancies." Sharon nodded slightly as she continued staring at the mirror, awaiting the secret existence to raise his question. The blood-colored text squirmed and no longer paused like before. Everything appeared at once. "What are your thoughts regarding your teacher? Miss Sharon has a teacher, that's right, as part of the Temperance faction, to not be influenced by the Rose school of thought which had changed internally, and to keep to her original path. Someone must have provided her with help. This is also one of the reasons why she and Marek could escape." Enlightened, Klein anticipated Sharon's answer. Sharon pursed her lips. "I respect her. She used her." Klein nearly couldn't maintain his smile from the shock. Including the Orthodox churches and the various major Beyonder organizations, grounded angels were very rare. There might only be one or two. He originally imagined that Sharon's teacher was a sequence 4 or 3 saint with a peak strength equivalent to see King John Cotman. To his surprise, she had used her as a pronoun. In Lone, ancient Fasak, and even Jotun and Elvish, this pronoun was very different from his, her, its. After his shock, Klein suddenly sighed deeply. Miss Sharon's current situation largely implies that her teacher is probably not around. She and Marek escaped perhaps due to the final struggle of the Temperance faction within the Rose school of thought. And to the mother tree of desire, either its corruption or decimation to create a sealed artifact. There will not be any other choices. The mirror turned dark again as the bright red text vanished. After a while, new words appeared again. "Continue. I no longer have any questions. Thank you for your help," Sharon curtsied as she said slowly. With her saying that, the mirror returned to normal. The lighting in the billiard room wasn't dim any longer. Sharon looked at Klein and said in a tone without any abnormalities, "We shall forego this matter." Clearly, she also understood the meaning behind the blast of light that appeared during the hidden existence's final answer. Klein shook his head and smiled. "There's no need to rush into a decision. Let me ask you a few more things. Perhaps there might still be a chance that doesn't require us to take too much of a risk. At least my divination results say that it's possible," he added silently. "What is it?" Marek couldn't help but ask. 879 Dual Purpose. Upon hearing Marek's question, Klein picked up the piece of paper with the symbol that summoned arrows and shook it as he wiped away his smile. He said in all seriousness, "Tell me the detailed process for creating a pharaoh mummy in the ancient Highlands kingdom." As he said that, the piece of paper was engulfed in scarlet red flames, turning to ash. Marek glanced at Sharon and replied after some thought. "First step, lay it down for 3 to 5 days, and use some auxiliary methods to make the Beyonder characteristic naturally seep out, and not become a sealed artifact from fusing with any parts of the pharaoh's body. Second step, hold a cleansing ritual. Place the corpse on an altar, pray to the chained god, and hope that half the deceased spirit remains in the body. This won't affect the return of the Son of God, and it can also allow the created mummy to maintain a long period of spirituality. Third step, using Beyonder powers or actual technology, remove the corpse's brain, innards, and bodily fluids, leaving only the heart. Fourth step, stuff the corpse with perfumes and medicine that's filled with spirituality and completely dehydrate the body. Fifth step, stuff the perfumes and medicine inside again. Arrange some preparations for a ritual on the corpse's surface, then wrap it up in linen bandages before putting it into a sarcophagus. Sixth step, the organs which were handled in a similar manner as the fourth step will be used as materials for the ritual. They will be placed in the four corners of the sarcophagus. Likewise for the brain and bodily fluids. The former will be stirred into mush, mixing with the latter, and the sarcophagus will have some preserved circulatory tracts that mimic the deceased state before death. This can gather spirituality from the spirit world and the surroundings, making the pharaoh mummy an ingredient rich in spirituality even after more than a millennium. It can be made into a rather powerful zombie. Sounds like it has nothing to do with enhancing one's ability in that area. I wonder how apothecaries turn such rot into a miracle. Yes, there seems to be a difference in the way Egyptian mummies are made on Earth. The level of mysticism involved is a lot greater. Klein finished listening carefully and quickly analyzed if there was anything that could be used as part of the plan. Regardless, Tutankhamen's mummy is something with extreme research value. Unless it's necessary, no one is willing to destroy it. Klein fell into deep thought for a moment before looking at Sharon, who had returned onto her high stool. He asked with a solemn expression, "What's the furthest distance you can travel with mirror blink?" Sharon sat there and answered without any hesitation, 300 meters. That's far enough, much better than my flaming jump. However, this is expected. After all, a wraith's main trait is to come and go without detection, while flaming jump is just part of a magic show. Not bad. This can be used. Klein couldn't help but inwardly make a poignant remark. Although he once had a wraith marionette, he didn't know the limits of mirror blink because before it could reach its limit, it would slip out from his control radius. Once that happened, the marionette was equivalent to a dead object. The blink would fail midway. Klein asked a few more questions and formulated a general plan. After looking at Sharon and Marek separately, he said with a steady tone, "We still have a chance of snatching Tutankhamen's mummy away. There is a risk, but it won't be high. Yes, that's on the condition that the two of you listen to my instructions. Let me lead this operation. Of course, if you believe it's unacceptable, you can choose to terminate the operation midway and choose to return. That's your freedom. Just remember to pay me." If this was in the past, Marek would have rejected the proposal without a thought. He and Sherlock were considered very experienced mid-sequence Beyonders, so how could he listen to a newly advanced Beyonder who had once sought their protection before? But after the previous cooperation effort, the intelligence, adaptability, and the mysterious items Sherlock Moriarty possessed had left a deep impression on Marek. He couldn't help but consider him as equals. When news of Jam and Sparrow continuously reached Backlund, he had been shocked, being even more convinced that he was one of the strongest Beyonders below that of high-sequence Beyonders. In mysticism, this was a form of authority when it came to Beyonder combat. Since he possessed authority, it meant abiding by it. He can still teleport. Marek recalled the way Sherlock Moriarty appeared, and he had a strong sense of confidence bolstered within him. Perhaps there was a chance of success. He turned his head and looked at Sharon. The two nodded in unison. "All right," Sharon responded, her blue eyes not showing any signs of hesitation. Klein immediately revealed a smile. "I'll go into the specifics when we rendezvous at the scene." Apart from defining the problems and obtaining a more accurate account of the situation, his deliberate appearance using traveling and providing a secret existence to obtain intel was also to establish his image. It boosted the way they viewed him, giving him the ability to be in charge. As a marionettist, even without a marionette for the time being, he had to control others to complete a targeted act. To Klein, this operation was partly to help Sharon and Marek, but he also had hopes of using this grand act and his directing of puppets to further accelerate the digestion of his potion. It had to be said that the immense pressure of Ammon's appearance in Backlund and his recent interaction with spectators had allowed the marionetteless him to greater understand the marionettist principle he had previously concluded. With his marionette as a lead, he could control his enemies to put on a puppet act in real life. His current idea was, even without a marionette, he could use his dominance, language, and the settings he designed, or a combination of these factors, to control his target, putting on a puppet act in real life. Marionettists weren't only controlling spirit-body threads, and what he did previously was merely a small attempt. Just like Ammon, a simple appearance is enough to put many matters into motion. It makes me and Pallas Zarost appear to be waiting for him to signal with a wave of the conductor's baton. Klein silently sighed as he heard Sharon and Marek answer in unison, "Okay." In the evening at Pritz Harbor, there were elegant gas street lamps made of black metal. They illuminated the various streets with the light they emitted. At this moment, most of the ships had moored. Silence was the main tune of the area. At the top of a warehouse, there were many wooden crates circling an area. 3 figures suddenly appeared from the void. They were none other than Sherlock Moriarty in his formal suit and top hat, Marek in his white shirt and black vest, and Sharon, who always wore a black bonnet and regal dress. With the help of teleport, they directly traveled from Backlund all the way here. There was quite a distance between them and the dock where the ship that carried the Tutenses Roman II mummy was moored at. Klein pressed down with his right hand as the bottom of his feet stepped on the wood. He nimbly leaped above the crossbar and, like walking on flat ground, quickly arrived by the wall. There was a tiny air vent here. He then took out the telescope provided by Sharon, and he looked at the dock based on the intel. All the building roofs were occupied by soldiers with steam backpacks and thick-barreled rifles. They patrolled the area and were alert of their surroundings, prepared to shoot at any trespassers who dared come near. Only one warning was to be given. Apart from them, there were a few exaggerated robot monsters parked around the dock. They were entirely metal, and their height had exceeded that of giants. At the top of them, cold machine guns could rotate, and a steam chimney stood erect. The bottoms were grayish-white in color, with many parts exposing rivets, nuts, and gears. They looked rather crude. In addition, in front of the robots was a very thick cannon. Situated underneath it were 2 rows of metal wheels with rubber treads. They were obviously manned, but Klein couldn't see who they were, making it impossible to determine if they were Beyonders or not. Close to these steel monsters, above the dock was a dark black metal tower standing at a height of more than 10 meters. It had a complicated pulley system that seemed to lack any sophistication. Drooping down were steel cables and a hook. On the surface, it doesn't seem too simple, but it can't be considered a high-level military operation. Klein retracted his gaze and threw the telescope to the approaching Marek so that he could observe the situation. Before they started taking action, they had come to an agreement. It was to not use Beyonder powers, relying on non-mysticism methods to spy on their target to avoid sounding off any alarms. After all, it was very likely that a demigod was lurking in the dock district. Of course, Klein had adjusted the powers recorded inside Creeping Hunger. He had matched Paper Angel with Hurricane instead of Lightning Storm. After Sharon was kept up to date with the situation, Klein, who was standing by a wooden frame, revealed a seemingly relaxed smile. We only have one purpose today. It is to make an attempt if there's a chance. If there isn't, we'd rather observe by the side and even evacuate ahead of time. Any questions? No, Sharon calmly replied. Marek shook his head, expressing the same intent. Klein nodded and looked at Marek. How many mirrors have you brought? 9. Marek showed his preparations as he pointed to his eyes. These also count. All right, Klein pointed in a direction. When I leave, you are to head for Pritz Harbor. Along the way, throw these mirrors. Marek gaped as though he wanted to ask why, but soon he understood Sherlock Moriarty's intentions and nodded seriously. I'll follow your instructions. Klein smiled as he extended his hand in midair. I hope for a pleasant partnership. Marek hesitated for a second before extending his right hand to struck palms with him. After doing this, the tense feelings in him felt relieved for some reason. Klein turned to Sharon, took out an iron cigar case and passed it to her. Take this. After receiving my cue, fly towards the lighthouse. Following that, silently count down from 3 before removing the wall of spirituality. During this process, as well as after it's completed, you must not stop flying. Try to fly as irregularly as possible, regardless of the methods employed. When you see me create fireworks, immediately isolate the cigar case with a wall of spirituality and do a mirror blink in Marek's direction. Use everything you have. After you meet up, flee all the way without waiting for me. I'll teleport to you. One of the core items in the operation tonight was Azek's copper whistle. Stealing the Tutenses Roman II mummy is difficult, but I can get it to run towards me. 880 The Silent One. After hearing Sherlock Moriarty's plan, Sharon didn't say anything apart from nod her head once in agreement. Klein immediately took out a steel-gray metal mask and wore it, only revealing his eyes and nostrils. Similarly, Sharon and Marek wore similar masks as well. However, they had different reasons for the disguise. For the Wraith and Zombie, it was solely to prevent themselves from being recognized by the lone military, thus curtailing their ability to be active in Backlund. As for a Faceless, the act of wearing a mask hid his Pathway's trait of being able to change appearances. It was a form of misdirection for the lone militaries and Rose's school of thought's subsequent investigations. After all, they would follow normal logic. Since your face was fake to begin with, why would you do the unnecessary act of wearing a mask? After waiting for a while, a dull whistle sounded as a ship cruised into the port in the darkness. Klein returned to the vent, raised the telescope, and cast his gaze at the heavily guarded harbor. He soon saw a hybrid sailboat with a chimney slowing down as it docked. Meanwhile, 2 squads of soldiers in red tops and white pants ran over in an orderly fashion with rifles in hand before standing on 2 sides of a path. Before long, a gangway was lowered, and people from the ship began alighting. First were sailors carrying wooden crates. Following that, it was a young man dressed in a major's uniform. He held a small casket made of crystal with a heavy expression. Surrounding him were several members of the ship's crew. The crew were holding lanterns, illuminating the casket from various angles, thus accentuating what was inside. In it was a human skull without any flesh and blood left. It had a strange luster swirling under the light. The group of people moved at a rather slow speed, as though they were constantly taking note of the angles of illumination to not leave any dark spots. After they got off the ship, they followed the path to the nearest cargo rail, where a steam locomotive was waiting there like a giant serpent. In the cabin behind, a man in a black formal suit walked out. He was carrying a huge iron bucket, and diagonally above, one could see that it contained layers of ice blocks. For a second, Klein nearly imagined that there was a bottle of wine inside the ice blocks, just like how alcohol was presented amongst high society and high-end restaurants. However, he soon saw what was embedded in the ice. It was a hand made purely out of gold. Unlike the group of people, the man carrying the bucket moved very quickly. Beads of perspiration kept dripping from his forehead as the contact between his palms and the metal surface produced mist. He seemed to be worried that the ice would completely melt before he arrived at his destination. The military managed to plunder quite a number of sealed artifacts at the Star Highlands, Paz Valley, and Hagenti Plains. Klein sighed poignantly as he patiently waited for Tutanses' sarcophagus to appear. Another 10+ minutes passed when, situated in the distance, Klein, Sharon, and Marek heard heavy footsteps. It was like a giant walking over a hollow deck. Right on the heels of that, the cabin side door opened. 4 knights in black full-body armor carried a golden sarcophagus as they slowly walked out. Their footsteps clinked and clanked, reverberating. The sarcophagus's surface was engraved with symbols like strange birds, serpents, feathers, and masks. It appeared ancient and mysterious, with the rich flair of an ancient Highlands kingdom. It was none other than the Tutanses Roman II mummy's resting bed. Sounds of metallic chains grinding against each other sounded as a pitch-black metal capstan slowly rotated, lowering the steel cables and hooked down. People began securing them against the corners of Tutanses' sarcophagus. Then, a complicated gear system began operating as the heavy sarcophagus was hung up, moving towards a topless carriage outside the harbor. The 4 black, full-bodied armored knights had the pressure on them relieved as they sat on the deck, letting out heavy panting. Amidst the panting, one of the knights suddenly grunted. In a crevice of his armor, dark red blood streamed out in increasing amounts. Towards the end, tiny black armored worms began crawling out of it. Thud! The knight fell backward, his helmet falling off, revealing mangled flesh and a head whose eye sockets were empty. Countless black armored worms crawled out. A Hexe Tutanses' mummy is a manifestation of hexes itself. Even when wearing armor with augmented blessings, it's unable to completely avoid being cursed. Klein sighed silently as he cast his gaze to the golden sarcophagus, which was being slowly lowered onto the carriage. The carriage outside the harbor didn't have any horses. Standing around the carriage were 4 knights in the same outfits as the ones before. With the sarcophagus landing, they approached the carriage in preparation to pull it. At this moment, the wheels of the carriage suddenly began spinning as it maintained its balance and began moving towards the side. At that moment, it seemed to come to life. Klein's mind tensed up as his gaze turned intense. Pa, pa, pa. The wheels spun rapidly, slamming into the rocks, logs, and steps on an irregular path. The carriage without any horses dragged the golden sarcophagus as it moved towards an empty spot of the harbor. This scene looked like a scene as described in a horror story. Close to the harbor, a steel monster with a chimney, cannon, and machine gun turned around as a deep voice was heard from the inside without any obstacles. Possession is prohibited here. Just as this was said, the carriage, which was moving by itself, lost its drive. After drawing out 2 long tracks, it steadily came to a halt. At the same time, a figure wearing a white robe with golden threads was outlined in midair. He had pale yellow curled hair, with his eye sockets clearly recessed. His face was thin to the bone. This was a middle-aged man with mixed heritage from the southern and northern continent. His brown eyes had irrepressible maleficence and madness. His rather thick lips were pierced with dense, patterned golden nails that sealed his mouth. He exuded a sinister and terrifying feeling. According to Sharon's and Marek's description of the characteristics and portrait, Klein instantly recognized him to be an important member of the Rose School of Thought, one of the leaders of the Highlands rebel army, Mamosi, who had the nickname, the Silent One. Just as Mamosi appeared, he cast his gaze to the steel monster that had issued the command. He completely ignored the Tutanses Roman II sarcophagus that was staying put diagonally beneath him. His previous attempt was apparently to determine the location of the lone military's demigod. In a snap, Mamosi raised his right hand and pulled at the corner of his mouth. The golden nails that pierced through his lips shot out like bullets as they no longer sealed his mouth. Following that, Mamosi opened his mouth. Klein didn't hear any sound, nor did he see any light. He discovered the gigantic steam chariot seemed to warp like it was melting. In a blink of an eye, it had transformed into a goat. A goat with glazed eyes and messy wool. With a spurting sound, blood spewed out of the goat's abdomen as a blob of flesh rolled out. Embedded in it was a white glove and a golden mask. A beam suddenly shot out from the flesh, cleaving through all the chaos and evilness. The squirming flesh and blood began forming a humanoid figure, returning to its original appearance. It was a black-haired, golden-eyed man with a mask. At this moment, Mamosi raised his palm, causing all the guns and cannons that were aiming at him to rise into the sky as they shot into the air. Then he took out a cloth doll. The doll seemed to be made of old cloth. There were obvious stains and specks of blood. Its eyes had been dug out, leaving 2 empty holes. The moment it saw light, its face began transforming. Its target of reference was none other than the demigod from the lone military. Its eye sockets were aimed straight at the man in the golden mask. When the lone military's demigod saw this, he immediately made the ring on his right hand emit a crystalline beam of light as he vanished from his spot, phasing to the back of Mamosi. However, the doll's transformation didn't stop at all. Meanwhile, to the side of Tutmosis' sarcophagus, the space around it warped as a translucent mouth spanning more than 10 meters was outlined. The mouth suddenly opened and sucked in, creating a terrifying gale that swept up the sarcophagus and the carriage together. It was suspected to be a spirit world creature. It was about to devour the Tutmosis Roman II mummy's sarcophagus. Suddenly, the bullets and cannonballs that shot into the air turned brilliant as they gathered together, transforming into a grand sea of light that inundated everything. Klein felt a stabbing pain in his eyes, and even though he closed them in time, tears still flowed down. 2 seconds later, he opened his eyes again and saw the spirit world creature that was only a gigantic mouth had disappeared. Tutmosis' golden sarcophagus remained sitting silently on the other carriage. Mamosi's figure had blinked away to the other end of the harbor thanks to a metallic surface. The dirty doll in his hand had been restored to its original form, while the masked golden-eyed man did a short-distance teleport as he engaged in tight pursuit. And the spot where the two were originally standing, a female figure in a black evening gown appeared. She too was wearing a golden mask, and on her head was a crown folded from thorns. On the crown, pure light quickly swirled, amassing an ocean. However, it was in a dim state. At this moment, Klein saw a hand wearing a black glove. It was hidden in the shadows, reaching out as it grabbed at the sarcophagus where Tutmosis' mummy was stored. The sarcophagus suddenly vanished, appearing right in front of the palm. The Rose School of Thought hadn't sent one demigod but 2. Furthermore, they brought with them a sealed artifact from the Marauder Pathway. Upon seeing this, Klein immediately turned his head and shouted to Marek, "Run!" Marek had been awaiting his orders, so he leaped up the moment he heard that, rushing out of the warehouse as he dashed fervently out of the harbor. Klein immediately turned around and yelled out to Sharon, "Begin!" Sharon didn't hesitate as well. Holding the iron cigar case, she flew towards the lighthouse. As a wraith, the walls and obstacles along the way were non-existent. The commotion she and Marek created had probably been detected, but as it was far from the harbor and far from the battlefield, no one paid attention or bothered. Klein quickly retracted his gaze, extended his left hand, and aimed his palm at the ventilation hole right where Tutmosis' golden sarcophagus was. In less than a second, a blurry book materialized before him as an ethereal, distant chant sounded in his ears. "I came, I saw, I record." The pages flipped before landing on one page. Hurricane. This was a demigod-level beyonder power that had a wide area of effect.